Good evening and welcome to Let's Talk, Rhodes Journalism School's cutting-edge current affairs television show. I am your host for this edition, and I am Thandeka Gqubule-Mbeki. Tonight we go beyond the headlines in an historic discussion about the journalism of Jeff Wicks of Media 24. His work has brought our country to a point of reckoning. We can assert with no fear of contradiction that the publication of his book titled The Shadow State, Why Babita Deokaran Had to Die, and the related July 6 press conference by Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi, and after that, our country will never be the same again. This is because the events unearthed in Wicks' book have awakened the country to the entanglement of our criminal justice system and criminal cartels that peddle drugs, assassins for sale, cash heists, and other deadly contraband. Here on Let's Talk, we're talking just the truth, because silence changes nothing. Welcome, Jeff. Let's get talking.
Thank you for having me.
But first, an advert.
Whistleblowers in South Africa are an endangered species.
Protecting whistleblowers is essential. It's not just for justice, but it's about safeguarding South Africa's democracy, our institutions, and our economic stability.
Now, over the years, whistleblowers in South Africa have been increasingly faced with threats to their lives and some ultimately being killed.
The safety of whistleblowers is once again in the spotlight.
The job of remaining silent is often the safest. It is not because the truth is hard to find, but often dangerous to tell. Whistleblowers are the people who dig through documents, notice the numbers that do not make sense, and refuse to look away. They identify what the public deserves to know. They risk their livelihoods, face intimidation, harassment, legal threats, job losses, and sometimes a fate that is far worse. South Africa has seen a steady rise in attacks for those who speak out. The Thandeka Commission showed the extent to which corruption has pervaded our public institutions. Billions of rands, hundreds of companies, tenders inflated, invoices fabricated.
We blew the whistle in the public interest.
Witnesses who came before this commission, which was the largest corruption inquiry in South Africa's history, did so at enormous personal cost.
I'm not safe at all.
Today, the Madlanga Commission continues the same difficult work, investigating criminal networks embedded inside our public institutions. Once again, witnesses are coming forward. Once again, threats are being made. This raises an urgent question.
Being a whistleblower in South Africa is a dangerous job. In 2021, Babita Deokaran was assassinated in her car outside her Johannesburg home after she blew the whistle on the Department of Health.
She was shot 12 times only because she believed deeply and without compromise that public money should serve the public. As acting CFO for the Gauteng Department of Health, she had access to the numbers, and the numbers told a disturbing story. Hundreds of transactions, more than 200 suspicious companies, some of which did not exist, around 850 million in irregular payments, money meant for medicine, equipment, and patient care at Tembisa Hospital, all allegedly drained through inflated invoices and fraudulent contracts. She reported it. She gathered the evidence. She handed it to the investigators from the Special Investigating Unit, but the system meant to protect her failed her. Her assassination sent a message to every whistleblower in this country, but her story also became a call for South Africa to do better, to close the gap between those who expose corruption and to those who are supposed to protect them.
We, at this time, remember Babita Deokaran, who died at the hands of the worst kind of retaliators, assassins.
Now, welcome back. We are in conversation with Jeff Wicks. Jeff, my father was a preacher, and he used to say, never believe that the dead do not speak. I've been feeling, even as I listened to some of the testimony at both the ad hoc committee and the Madlanga Commission, that indeed Babita has been speaking, but first she spoke through you. Have you felt that you have been channeling Babita, following in her footsteps?
I think, we started investigating Babita's murder on the day that she was killed, and it really was a marathon. And it was 7 months before we really got a break in the case, and the break came when we managed to get our hands on her laptop and cell phone. And that sent us down a path which informs contemporaneous events and tells us where we are today. I mean, we see everyone who we've identified through our reportage now being held to account through the Madlanga Commission. And truly, Babita Deokaran is responsible for that. She's the genesis of the forced accountability that we're now seeing on a daily basis through that Commission of Inquiry, and it's so important. And when I think about her, it's worthwhile noting that she's only become a figure in death, and in death she's become synonymous with ethics and courage and good public service, and that's because of her sacrifice. And I think that really she is haunting the steps of the people who looted Tembisa Hospital, because those same folk who were preying on the public healthcare sector then moved on to bigger game. And prime example of that is Cat Matlala, who was targeting tenders at the SAPs. So it's the same group of rogues that were operating at Tembisa Hospital that fanned out, and the only reason why we know any of their names is because of Babita Deokaran.
Now, Babita first pointed them out through her taking a looking glass and really getting granular with the books at Tembisa Hospital. And out popped these companies and some names. But we only got to know about those big names that are now big. They were invisible, shadowy figures then through your work. And just tell us about the experience of knitting together into story Babita's different little ledgers and accounts.
So where we started was with a single 10-page document, and that was a report that she filed into suspicious transactions at Tembisa Hospital. And that essentially became our lodestar, because once we found that, we had an idea of the methodology that they were using to extract money through the 3-quote system and keeping payments between a certain threshold. But critically, when she filed that report 3 weeks before her assassination, she appended a list of 217 companies, and that was a trail for us to follow. And what we wanted to do was finish her work. She'd obviously stumbled upon something insidious at Tembisa Hospital, and we had the opportunity, with the trove of documents that we found on her laptop and on her cell phone, to actually bring that work into effect. When she found the anomalous spending at Tembisa Hospital, and the only reason why she found it, because there was a spike in expenditure, they had extracted 850 million rands worth of payments in the space of only 4 months. And it was very easy for her to identify the beneficiaries of that, because everything leaves a paper trail, especially when it comes to money. And what we began to do was just peel back the layers of opacity and ownership of those businesses. And it's a daunting task when you first start, because you're faced with a list of several hundred companies. But even on a cursory search, looking at who directs those entities, that list immediately becomes smaller. And that was part of proving our thesis very early on, was to say there's definitely syndicate activity at this hospital. And when you have individuals who command fleets of companies, all simultaneously trading with a single facility, it throws up red flags all over the place. And it was then to us to say, well, these are the actors behind this extraction. And initially in our investigation, we identified 3 syndicates. The SIU went further. They identified 9 distinct syndicates. and that relates to a 2.3 billion rand extraction out of a hospital in a space of only 4 years.
And what was your original total of money extracted? And
we were working on a figure of 850 million rand, and to us then it is a massive amount of money.
It is.
And because we've become so beaten back and inured by corruption in South Africa, 850 million rand all of a sudden doesn't seem like a big figure, but truly it is. The SIU obviously pegged that at 2.3 billion, and that's because they have their powers of intrusion. And what gives me heart and hope for the future of journalism in South Africa is that we started that work and we set that in motion. And I'm glad that we're finally coming to a point where we may see that work come to fruition.
now, Jeff, here at JMS, we have got many journalistic sayings, and they are by famous journalists and famous thinkers about media studies. We pepper them all over our toilets. And one in the ladies' lab, it says, journalists must not do the footwork of the cops, of the law enforcement officials of a country. But here we are, doing the footwork.
Yeah, in an ideal world, we shouldn't. In an ideal world, it would negate the need for people like me and people like my colleagues, but that's not where we are. We find ourselves in a country that is beset by corruption. And, I love this place, and I love the potential that South Africa holds. And that's why we do the work that we do, because imagine a country that we live in where every tax rand reached its intended destination. Think about what Tembisa Hospital would look like with a 2.3 billion rand upgrade. It would be a state-of-the-art facility. And
patients wouldn't sleep on the floors.
Exactly right. And that's the cost of corruption. We have a facility that's falling apart. As soon as the SIU calls for documents, people go set it on fire. And the people that suffer are the millions of residents who rely on that facility in the lowest ebb of their lives to go to a state hospital and then, unfortunately, in some cases, die there because of a lack of service.
It seems to me that the porous tender system and the privatization of everything, particularly public goods in South Africa, has led us down a slippery road to this kind of morass that we find ourselves in. How do we turn the tide? How do we turn back onto the safer road?
I think there's a number of quick fixes. The first is to implement an electronic procurement system. We operate today in 2026 with all the technology available to us, yet the state still uses a paper-based procurement system. And that's by design, because it can be manipulated.
Yes.
And the state will procure in excess of 1.25 trillion rands worth of goods and services every year. That is a massive trough. And if we don't safeguard that, if we don't put systems in place to monitor that, that money will continue to be stolen. The second way we can do that is professionalizing the civil service. And I think it's a damning indictment on the Gauteng Health Department, specifically speaking about the Tembisa case, that the SIU found 116 health department officials who'd taken kickbacks, which translates into tens of millions of rands. And what we realized in investigating that case and then looking at the grander view is that the frailty comes from the human touch. It's the people that can be corrupted. So you have to mitigate against that, and that's done with systems. Without that, we are going to continue on this backslide towards mafia state territory.
And that's a scary prospect, and it's not a far-fetched prospect, because there are many narco states in the global south, and many countries in the west are experiencing democratic backsliding. And the trajectory that South Africa is on is truly perilous. But let's get back to the investigation. Now, the fascinating part about it is what the money was spent on. When the SIU raided Morgan Maumela's mansion that was on top billing, the reversing out of all those unmentionable luxury cars, instead of radiography machines, dialysis equipment, It was staggering.
It's the perfect way to equate it. And I was actually there that day, and I watched the Lamborghinis being reversed out, and to the point where the SIU even took out a child's Land Rover, a toy.
A baby Land Rover.
Someone on Twitter called it Coco Felon.
You are joking.
And I thought that was hilarious. But I mean, it's such an obnoxious and garish show of wealth. And I think corruption is perfectly contextualized when we can show people this is what money that was meant for the poor and indigent people of Tembisa was spent on. It was spent on bespoke furnishings, all of the best, to get a living space that's worthy of top billing fame. And that wasn't his only house. We tracked a property portfolio across 7 of the 9 provinces worth 335 million rand. He had an 80 million rand house in Camps Bay, a 35 million rand house in Bantry Bay. You know, the list was endless, and all of that money came from the Gauteng Department of Health, and primarily it came from Tembisa Hospital.
You also caught sight of his very interesting and well-connected visitors to his mansion, and into this dialogue came more characters. Bejane Chauke, whose influence goes into the corridors of power, right into the presidency, and has been deployed on many presidential missions. Also, there you found many other characters who have now become household names, and household names of infamy and most fearsome people. How did the story just mushroom in your view? Why did it mushroom?
I think there's many reasons for that. And I think critical in it was the fact that we had Babita Deokaran's laptop and 60,000 emails. And it really was unimpeachable evidence that no one could gainsay. And that is so seldom found in investigative journalism, where you get such a data set that is complete and is irrefutable.
It was almost like the Gupta files.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And that's what gave us the power, because instead of asking for the health department to confirm things, we told them what we had. And we also gave them the opportunity to lie. And when they lied, we published the truth and shamed them. And eventually they stopped talking to us. But fundamentally, we had so much information. And when we were armed with that, and armed with an intelligent publishing strategy that said, we're not going to drop this all at once. We're really going to flesh this out. We're going to sketch the characters and follow the money, because we wanted to see where the money went after it left the public purse and it went into profiteers' back pockets. And what we found were members of the criminal underworld, like Kat Matlala, individuals like Morgan Maumela, with direct links to the president, both through his advisor and through his family. And the president will deny any association, but that story is getting thinner by the day. The reality is that we have extremely powerful individuals who've marshaled such a massive amount of money through graft, who are too uncomfortably close to the levers of power through individuals like the president. And it's a massive problem, and it tells you exactly the extent to which these syndicates and cartels, whatever nomenclature you'd like to use, have penetrated the halls of influence.
Could this unravel the 7th administration?
I'm not sure it would go to that point, but I think the president has acknowledged that organized crime is a visceral threat to our democracy. And the formation of the Madlanga Commission is obviously to mitigate that. But I watch that commission on a daily basis, and it is horrifying. Not only is it horrifying to see the proximity that our top-ranking police officers have to known criminals, but it's their willingness to be induced. You can buy the head of organized crime in Gauteng province for 70,000 rand. That is a low, low price to pay. And when we consider the fact that if they're not bent, they are just so stupid. Honestly speaking, for the most part, listening to the testimony of some of our highest ranking police officers, it's terrifying to understand that people so dumb could find their ways into positions of influence like that. Chief among them is the Commissioner of Police, Fannie Masemola, a completely amoebic creature who simply blows with the wind. And he's allowed this rot to take root and flourish under his tenure simply because He is just nowhere. Whilst Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi was holding press briefings, he was missing. He knows that this is happening within his organization because we've been reporting on it for years. And I think if anyone needs to go as a result of this Madlanga Commission, he should be the first
to vacate. I wonder if we should perhaps look also at the parallel story that you broke, which is the Ekurhuleni, which is playing out also at the Madlanga Commission, parallel to the story of Babita and the Tembisa Hospital story that unearthed all these other characters. But the same cast of people are playing out in relation to the Ekurhuleni scandal, and I was horrified by the treatment of whistleblowers in relation to the Ekurhuleni thing and the deaths that we have seen. What's your take on all of that?
So, you know, it's an interesting feeling as a journalist, and this is something I haven't shared with many people, but, you know, just to explain the context, when we found Cat Matlala at Tembisa Hospital, we started looking at him specifically, and then we found that he had an undue influence over the police force, and that was easy to tell from early on. And then we found video footage of him using blue lights and sirens in his cars.
It was his wife, Mama Cat.
It was Mama Cat who was taking her cubs to school and going to the airport with blue light escorts. And we published that story. And what happened thereafter was that when we published it, we obviously sent a right of response to Ekurhuleni, and to their credit, the officials in place at that time took action. They actively tried to investigate Julius Mkhwanazi. People call him Temu Mkhwanazi, and I think it's quite apposite. So they moved to take action against him, but he was so politically connected that they ended up being purged themselves. And these people were really put through hell for years. They were victimized, run out of their jobs, attacked, kidnapped in some cases. And I found myself feeling terribly guilty because I had set that in motion. And it's a lesson to journalists, I think, that you must be aware of the consequences of your actions. And I mean, I understand in my rational mind that there was no other way to go about that. The truth needed to be told. But I do carry a sense of guilt because individuals like Colonel Tepa, the spokesperson, whose only crime was forwarding an email.
To you.
And she was, from me.
From you.
And she was victimized for years. Revo Spies, Isaac Mapie, not Tika Nhliza, Xolani Nhliza.
Yes.
Individuals who simply tried to do the right thing and became victims of capture. And then it became obvious to me, this is a new evolution of state capture. And thankfully, through the processes that we're seeing now, they've been vindicated. And the people who deserve to be in the hot seat, like Julius Mkhwanazi, sitting there sweating and writhing under intrusive questioning.
Buckets of water.
It's absolutely well deserved. He deserves to be exactly where he is. And we have more coming for Julius Mkhwanazi, and it will be coming soon.
It seems so. You have more coming, or the Commission has more coming?
Oh, no, I have more coming.
Interesting. You said it first on this wonderful inaugural talk, Let's Talk at JMS. Thank you for that scoop. I want to talk about whistleblowers and journalists. What's the nexus, and how do we go forward?
I think the two go hand in glove. And I think whistleblowers are an incredibly valuable buttress of our democracy that we have to protect. I mean, it's trite by this point.
Yeah.
Justice Zondo mentioned it at the Commission. He said, if we don't protect whistleblowers, they won't be here to help us when we need them again. And that's abundantly clear. The problem is that the wheels and the machinery of the state moves incredibly slowly. So we need legislative reforms to improve protections around whistleblowers, which we don't yet have.
It's coming this year.
Well, it was coming last year too, so I'll believe it when I see it. And what's important then is that these individuals who are willing to stand by a code and an ethos and who are unwilling to look the other way will have some form of cover. Their lives will never be easy. And That said, as journalists, we have a responsibility not only to protect them, but to tell their stories and to understand that this is not a source. This is not a document repository. It's a human being. And they have to be treated like that. And, you know, we've tried to develop a way, and I mean, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, but we have to acknowledge, and what I tell whistleblowers when they come to me is that this is not one meeting where you're going to talk to me and we're going to walk away. You and I are going to walk this path together, because there are so many ways where you can unconsciously compromise that person. So it becomes a thing of, it needs to be constant engagement, and then we need to engage in a safe and secure and discreet manner, because there's many facets to protection. And we're learning as we go as well. Certainly I am. And in Babita Deokaran's case, she died before I could offer her any assistance. I never knew her, I never met her, nor was she ever someone who spoke to the press. But since then, we've had other people who've come forward and said, I don't want to be Babita, please help me.
In your speech to the Rhodes community today, you spoke about new areas and new disciplines that journalism must begin to consider appropriating aspects of into the core curriculum for training new journalists. I was fascinated by that. You said data science, you said forensic accounting, you said other visual illustration, and we must use the technologies and AI to bring us up to speed with the corruption is morphing, and we must change as well, and we must improve our abilities to apprehend and write these stories and to detect the corruption as it morphs and moves. What advice would you give us to improve our curricula as South African journalism schools? Certainly we are deeply interested in this discussion as JMS.
I think when we consider that a common trope that investigative journalism focuses on is procurement corruption. And an easy thing to incorporate into your system, because you have a law faculty, is procurement law and procurement prescripts. That's an easy fix. But beyond that, it's far be it for me to tell such an august institution of journalism education what to put in their curriculum. I can just tell you what I see from the field. And if I could offer any advice to prospective journalists and journalism students, read. Read, read, read. Don't stop reading, and then write. And I think it's what some people who want to pursue journalism don't understand, is that it's a craft that rests upon two pillars. Being able to get the story and then being able to tell it. Because you can have the best sources in the world. If you cannot communicate that story, it's worthless. And we must not lose sight of the fact that fundamentally we are storytellers. There must be a narrative. It must be engaging. It must be rich. And that is a skill that takes practice. It's a muscle that needs to be trained. And we see it when interns come to us. Very rough, because they haven't done a lot of writing. They write for their assignments. You need to write and write and write and read.
My reflection on your work is that, and I know that this is not just my reflection alone. I've had conversations in preparation for your arrival with many of my colleagues and students, is that journalism that is primarily concerned with human flourishing is the journalism that will out and that will endure, that will show resilience regardless of the platforms, regardless of the digital platforms. It will outlive the many disruptions in the modes of production, because we have just come out of industrial age journalism, the printing press and newspapers and so on, and we are now in the digital age. But it's only journalism that means something to human development and human flourishing in all its senses that will out. And your concern for these people who expose corruption, and for our society that is wrestling with the beast of corruption, that is hollowing out its belly and lobotomizing its brain, is a fundamental concern with the well-being of human society. So we are very proud of you.
Thank you.
And from one Nhlanhla winner to another, thank you so much for your work. And now let's cut to an ad break. Let's talk. Now, welcome back after that ad break, and we continue with a discussion with Jeff Wicks, and we summarize a discussion that is happening right here at Rhodes University Journalism School, and this is the School of Media Studies and Journalism, JMS. Jeff, thanks for coming, and what are your parting words to my students, to our students, and to all young aspiring journalists throughout the country?
I think that anyone who wants to pursue this career needs to understand that it is noble and rewarding work. That's been my experience with it, and I'm very lucky to do the job that I do, because I've always felt that you need to live as if you want to make an impact in this world, and I want to do journalism of consequence. And journalism can be frustrating at times because you write and you expose and you reveal and very little happens, or if something happens it takes a very long time. But when you do finally force change, force accountability, or place someone in a position where they have to answer difficult questions, it's incredibly rewarding, especially in our context where we have the failings of law enforcement. And you mentioned it earlier, where journalists should not necessarily step into the shoes of policemen. I disagree. I think we should, because if they're not doing it, and if it falls to us, then at least it's being done.
Yes, indeed. Where democracy is failing and where the other pillars of democracy fail, journalism has throughout history stepped into that gap and has done the work that others have shirked from. And on that sense, we do agree with you, we concur. So thank you so much for coming. And now, as we conclude this discussion, we would like to reflect on the whistleblowers who have lost their lives, and all of those who have put pen to paper to tell the stories of those who tried to tell the truth. So genuinely thank you. Thank you for the work. Thank you for the book. And thank you for sitting and chatting to us tonight. What Jeff has given us, what this conversation has given us, is a lot to take in and sit with, because Babita Deokaran's story is not a comfortable one. It was never going to be a comfortable one. A woman, a mother, a public servant, a witness, gunned down in broad daylight. That is not something you can make peace with easily. But here is what stays with me. It is that journalism will endure as a solution to our shaky democratic pillars. Whistleblowers are not just names on a witness list. They are people who believe that the truth is worth something, that people are worth something, and sometimes they pay the highest price for that belief. It doesn't have to be that way. South Africa is not short of courageous people. What we owe them and what we owe Babita is to make sure that courage is not wasted, that it is protected legislatively and otherwise, and that the next person who steps forward to tell the truth does not have to choose between justice and their life. That is the work ahead of us, and it is the work that belongs to all of us. I am Thandeka Gqubule-Mbeki, and this has been Let's Talk. So South Africa, Mzansi, let's keep talking. Good night. Thank you, Jeff.